Looking good. And we are live. Gonna wait till the top of the hour here. We'll make a couple of quick announcements and get rolling as people trickle in. Thank you, Carrington and Henri. So this is our third GMU so far, and Maher, it looks like you're on the hook for like the next couple. So
yeah, the next couple.
Cool. It's good to have you. And we got Michael in chat here, the silent voice of reason.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Michael will be taking, he'll be attempting to answer any questions that comes in.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll give everybody a couple more minutes to come in, and I'll give everybody the heads up on the Q&A process, and hopefully we'll have a little time at the end. I know you got a busy schedule today for as far as content's concerned, but maybe we can take some live questions at the end. If not, we've always got the chat.
Right.
And we're ready to go in one more minute here. And I'll do my best UFC announcer, and then I'll get out of here, and the party's all yours.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Excellent. Had really good numbers last session. Big thanks to everybody out there who was sharing the recordings. We'll talk a little bit about where to get the shared recordings on these and what we're kind of going to do moving forward. But lot of really good traction on folks who did watch, sharing the session out, which is fantastic.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's good that people are finding it useful. We had a lot of after the fact recording views, and actually the people are still watching the recording from the first session, from Tim's session, which is just fantastic. So here we are at the top of the hour. Thanks, folks, for joining. See a lot of people in the various rooms in your social media platforms. First off, wanted to thank everybody for coming. This is our third GMU. I can't believe we've been running this program already for 6 weeks, which is just crazy to think about, but thanks for coming. And as I was mentioning earlier, thanks for everybody who's been sharing the recordings out. We've been watching just hundreds of people watching the recordings after the live version. Obviously, thanks to everybody who's here live, because you get to ask the questions live, but big thank you to everybody who's sharing out. Hopefully you're finding this content useful and you're sharing it with folks that do find it useful. Right now, the recordings are usually available within 24 hours of the live broadcast. We push those out on Twitter, so keep an eye out for those. And then moving forward, we're actually going to have those also on the VMware Cloud Management Tech Zone. So we'll be sharing those out through the various social media platforms. So just kind of a heads up, we are built out with our programming all the way out until the end of July, and we're going to keep that party going into August. So keep an eye out for the schedules. We'll have those on all of the social platforms. So I know coming up on the 11th of next month, Maher is going to be back with us for Build a Self-Service Portal in a multi-cloud environment. So kind of a follow-up on a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today. And I know, Maher, you've got a slide at the end kind of talking about what's coming up, and
that's correct.
Can talk again. So with that, you know what, I am going to get out of here because I know you've got a packed agenda today. So
we do.
That, it's all you. So just real quick, if you have questions, ask questions in the chat, and either Maher or Michael will address your questions, and hopefully, if we have time at the end, we can maybe take some of those questions live. So with that, I am out of here. It's all you, sir.
Thank you, Anders. Big thanks to Anders. So welcome, everyone, to the VMware Aria automation, getting more out of, like Anders mentioned, this is the third, can't believe it, the third episode. And this one is going to be around creating and designing cloud templates. And I wanted to take this opportunity to really touch on all the little things that you need to be aware of before you even think about creating and designing cloud templates. One thing I'm going to ask is, and this is based on the experience we had in the last two sessions, is that for the Q&A and the questions, I would really appreciate if the questions is around the topic in question here. And nothing outside of the topic of creating and designing cloud templates, so we can focus on that topic. My name is Mahar Al Asfar, and I've been with VMware, over 10 years. And I'm currently in the senior technical marketing role for the cloud automation with VMware. So I'm really honored to be here. All right, let's kick it off. So if I can find my mouse. All right, so what are the things we're going to touch on in this session is all about VMware Aria automation template. And things like what is really the Aria automation template, some of the resources that you would have to really, work with, the types of resources, dependencies, the properties of these resources, and also look at what is a resource type schema is all about. And then we move on to another topic on editing the Aria automation template, which what we call the design canvas. And this here, we're going to have a chance to work with the, look at things like the code completion help, the inline syntax reference, the built-in validation without having to deploy your resources, and version control. Then we're going to move on to looking at user inputs, how we create them, and some of the really capabilities of the inputs, like dynamic inputs, leveraging Aria orchestrator action as inputs if something that you want to use. And then touch on constraint tags and metadata tags and all types of tags. And then look at things like property groups, secure properties, like if you're for saving and storing secrets, etc. Moving on to cloud template expressions and resource flags. And then finally, look at some of the methodology or approaches that we can use with Aria automation for application initialization and application configuration management using cloud templates or Aria automation templates. So we'll look at some custom specification, which is custom specs in vCenter, and how to leverage that. Cloud Init, which is open source Bootstrap, and Aria automation config that uses SaltStack. All right, so at the end of this session, it's a journey, I would say. So it's this is how we're going to begin. In the first, in the previous getting more out of session, we've talked about all the building blocks. Now that you've built your cloud accounts, your zones, your profiles, etc., and then your projects, and you've added users to the projects. Now it's time to learn about all things templates. So at the end of the day, you'll be able to curate services and applications and be able to create declarative cloud templates for not just VMware based cloud, but multi-cloud deployments. All right, just a few words here about the VMware Aria automation. For those that don't know, VMware Aria automation, it's a modern multi-cloud infrastructure automation platforms. It really enables modern infrastructure automation for use cases like self-service for multi-cloud, with governance, and having DevOps for infrastructure as a principle in approaching automation. There are multiple services within VMware automation that we're going to be using and throwing out there. The assembler, which used to be formerly called Cloud Assembly. Service Broker, we kept that name the same. So it's Aria Automation Service Broker. And then Aria Automation Pipelines, formerly CodeStream, if you're someone who've been using VRA for some time now. And then Aria Automation Orchestrator, Aria Automation Config, which is the SaltStack configuration management service. And then the Aria automation template is what we're really talking about today. All right. So VMware Cloud templates, they're smart, intuitive, and inclusive. Smart in a sense that we have smart placement engine that we can control with tags to decide really and where, how and where the template should be deploying based on an intent depending on how you build the template. So these tags is going to allow us to, based maybe on user inputs, that's something that they've selected in the request form, that would decide and where the VM or the application is provisioned. Is it on VMware? Is it on VMware using hyper integrated solutions like VMC, which is vSphere on AWS or Azure, or native MPC, native public cloud, like AWS, Azure, and and GCP, Google Cloud. Intuitive. It has code. It's a low code approach for developers and operators, and we also see it's really not that too hard to learn because there's also a UI component as you configure your template. If you're not so comfortable with the YAML code that the cloud template uses today. Inclusive, so we have deep support for a lot of common cloud elements. You'll see elements for AWS, you'll see elements for VMware, you'll see elements for Azure, etc. You'll also see elements for configuration management tool like Aria config, formerly SaltStack config, or even Ansible and Ansible Tower and Puppet. If those are some of the configuration management tools that you've invested in your organization. All right, so bridging the operator experience gap. So it's an API first approach, low code. This is HTML file based UI with an infrastructure as code editor. So you, in the assembler, VMware Aria Automation Assembler, in the design tab, you're able to create new blueprints and be able to see and drag and drop from a group of elements on the left hand side, as you see on the slide. They drag and drop and connect together. You also have the ability to use the code tab if you're comfortable with the code and know exactly what you're doing. And we'll see as you drag and drop, these elements and properties are automatically populated. So there's a lot of help, inline help with the editor to help you formulate and create or curate your services. The properties and the inputs. The properties is something that where you can use the UI to populate the values and configure these elements, and the input is to create inputs. And we'll look deeper into that. This is a declarative YAML language that you can that supports immutable approach if you want to, where you can deploy the same thing without change. And it's also stateful, uses stateful configuration, meaning if I have a multi-tier application and I want to take a value from one VM to another VM, I can use the stateful configuration where whatever IP the backend database is going to be assigned, it's going to be passed as a value, for example, to the front end server. There's deep support, like we mentioned, for common endpoints and integration. And there is dynamic intelligent placement, like we mentioned, using capability tags and for intent-based provisioning, depending on the declarative. Now, in the midst of all that, there we have an approach called cloud agnostic provisioning. And this is if you decide to create a common blueprint, depending on where you draw the line. If you have a use case where the cloud template or the Aria automation template is something where you can provision on like VMware or vSphere, on native AWS, Azure, GCP, and this is something hopefully we have at the end time to show you some of the multi-cloud blueprints that we put together in our labs and in using Aria automation to show you like a two-tier e-commerce application that can be deployed to vSphere, AWS, Azure, and GCP using the same blueprint. And what allows us to do that is really the cloud agnostic elements in the library that we can use when we drag and drop and configure and curate our applications. This is just a highlight of the code across clouds and platforms, what we have for out-of-the-box integration. Obviously, you see Terraform, Kubernetes, Git, whether it's GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket, TKG, our Tanzu workload cluster, and MPC, AWS, Azure, and also configuration management tool, like I mentioned, Ansible, Puppet, and also IPAM external integration for external IP assignments and DNS registration, Infoblocks, and Active Directory. All right, so what is an Aria automation template? So it's a declarative code that we use that basically where we can use it to define a desired state of a deployed resource. It's declarative, it's iterative, and we'll talk about what that. So declarative, we're defining the desired state rather than specifying how we accomplish the state. So for example, I want a small VM. I want an external network. So that's basically the declarative approach. And iterative, being able to apply, or once you modify the template, you can apply the same template, modify it, and reapply it on a running state already. So if you have an application where you've already deployed, so using Aria automation template, we can go back and create and mature the template, for example, and maybe, let's say, add a load balancer, increase the number of web servers, modify the cloud init script, for example. Once you're done and tested that, we can run an update operation on the deployed instance instead of creating a new deployment and then selecting the existing deployment that we deployed before. When you do that, you're going to see a plan where you're going to see an add or a redeploy, and in some cases, in terms of the update approach or the update operation that you're doing. So let's talk about the type of resources. So the resources, also known as constructs or elements. So these are logical representation of the infrastructure object types that we can deploy. So we have the cloud agnostic group. So we have a machine, load balancer, network, security group, and volume, and it works with across VMware and native public cloud. We have Kubernetes specific focused elements or constructs. We have AWS, GCP, or NSX focused constructs or elements. So these are the type of resources that you can, you're able to manipulate and use, where you can, starting with the cloud agnostic, like I mentioned, you can deploy cloud agnostic resources to any cloud vendor out there at the provisioning time. One thing here about the cloud agnostic approach is that not everything works on all cloud-based cloud types, right? So you have to be aware of where you're going to draw the line before you can't use cloud agnostic anymore. Because, for example, you can create a cloud agnostic blueprint where you're explicitly using S3 objects or constructs. Obviously, those is not going to work when you deploy the application on a non-AWS platform, for example. So you got to really know exactly where to draw the line. So this is where the pros and cons of that approach comes in place. The other one, you have the cloud-specific vendor resources, and this is such as specific to like AWS or Azure or GCP or VMware vSphere, and those can be deployed to match to matching cloud zones, to matching AWS, Azure, and GCP cloud zones, which we mentioned in the building block session a few weeks ago. Then you have the configuration management resources, and those are resources depending on what you invested in as an organization. So if you have SaltStack today or Aria Automation Config, you can use the configuration management to do things post-provisioning. So you'll see that Aria Automation have a lot of different ways to do things post-provisioning. So I provisioned a VM, and now what? So there's multiple different approaches. One of them is configuration management resources integration. like Aria Automation Config, Ansible open source, Ansible Tower, and also even using Terraform resources that can also be embedded. And we'll talk, and we have more slides on that later. Lastly, I want to mention custom resources. Anything that Aria Automation doesn't support today, you might have use cases where you want to create something that we don't support out of the box. You can create a custom resource, and custom resources uses extensibility in the backend. We do have a slide on that, so we'll talk more about the custom resources where you create that custom resource backed by extensibility, whether you're using VRI's or like Aria Automation Orchestrator or action-based extensibility for the custom resource, and then it becomes a resource that you can drag and drop on the element and configure it for the use case that you want to expand on. All right, so template resources, continuing on that. So when we talk about properties and resource type schema, so the schema identifies all the allowed properties and child properties for a resource that you're trying to provision. So if I drag and drop, for example, a Microsoft Azure machine, there's a group of properties, and what controls that properties is really the schema, right? So there is a link in the slides, and these slides will go out for everybody's watching, where you can look at the library of schema, and then you can actually look at all the different types of properties supported on that object type that you're working with. And that object type, whether it could be a machine, a volume, a Kubernetes cluster, a network. So regardless of the type of the resource, when you add actually the element into the canvas, we always populate the minimum set of properties and the mandatory set of properties that needs to be the values needs to be provided to be able to provision that resource depending on the resource type that you're doing. So those are the properties, and so every element that you drag and drop has a group of properties that you can expose in the YAML and work with depending on the use case that you're looking to achieve. So as we drag and drop things into the canvas, we start looking at dependency, and there's two types of dependency within Aria Automation template. We have implicit dependency and we have explicit dependency. Implicit meaning property binding, so it's automatically created for you. So for example, if I take a web tier and I drag and drop and link it to a network, I'm automatically creating a network. So on the right-hand side for the web tier application, if we go to line 148, you'll see the network, and you'll see that we auto-populated with an expression here. We call these blueprint expression or bindings. We automatically connect and configure this construct with the app public network that we connected the web tier construct to the network. So basically, I would hover over the web tier, and I will drag the little circle here and connect it to the network, and that will automatically create these implicit sort of a dependency for us, so we can pass values or connect an app like we did here to the network that it needs to be connected to. And the other type is explicit, and this is where you specify a dependency where there was no dependency to begin with. So there was no automatic dependency established. For example, let's say you want to create the database before creating the web tier. So this is where I create this little arrow here that automatically populates the code on the web tier and tells the web tier, hey, hold on, the database has to be up first and before you start provisioning the, for example, the web tier. So these are some of the dependency that you can work with. So the two types are implicit and explicit. The code completion. So I'm new to this. How does the product help me as I am, adopting or creating or editing my cloud templates? First thing is code completion help. So when you author a template, you are modeling the YAML code, obviously. So you're basically creating that YAML code, and the YAML editor allows us and helps us. There's a lot of different various helps that guide us through that modeling. One of them is the magic light bulb, for example. So the magic light bulb helps us insert optional to say, okay, by the way, this object type or element or construct you're working with has the following optional properties, and you can look at each of those optional properties and see if something that you would need to accomplish again your use case. The second thing is autocomplete. So autocomplete is the minute I go in front of a property in a construct, it will suggest available properties or maybe even capability tags. So if I'm, for example, let's say specifying the region, it'll automatically say, okay, is this required? So what's the next property or that you can use to really make things easier on the user? Query lookups. This is something that where you can query values from things like images and flavor mapping. So if I am going into an image property, it will automatically show me all the images that I've configured, or all the t-shirt sizing that I've configured, small, medium, large, etc. Syntax highlighting. This is where if you select one of the constructs in the designer, we highlight the corresponding code in terms of the code that represents or configured on that construct. Validation, we have real-time validation where you can actually go in, and if you do, like, let's say an extra space, or you've kind of screwed up the indentation in the YAML, we tell you right away that, hey, there is an error before you edit at this row, at this column, and point out exactly where the syntax error is. As you model the YAML code, we auto save, so you don't lose any of your hardworking time and efforts in creating and curating those applications. And also schema help. So the schema help, this is again back to any properties that you click on. It can tell you, for example, a small description of what the property is about and how it's used. And then search any of the codes within the. So this is all about the code completion help within the design canvas. The inlines syntax referencing the editing here. Inline help is available, like I mentioned, in the YAML editor when you click. So for example, here we're clicking on authentication as a property within the remote access property. And you see what type of property is that. So it's a string and then a description describing what is this property used for. Or again, when you're adding a resource to the canvas, we automatically populate the required fields or the minimum required fields. And we have these little nice, cute magic light bulbs that will give you hints about any additional options, properties that you can benefit from. All right. So editing Aria automation templates, we continue on that topic, and we'll talk about validation. So during the designing of the template, you often build the templates by starting with the minimum. And my approach always, and this is what I always tell my customers, is that start one step at a time. So it's a crawl, walk, run approach. So start with the essentials, make sure it deploys correctly, and then go and modify and add things to the template as the template grows. To be certain that the deployment works the way you want it, we have a test that you can do without having to physically deploy, and that test is going to test the logic, the code logic. So you basically add more resources and then retest, redeploy along the way, etc. And as you do this, the test is simply a simulation. Like I mentioned, it does not actually deploy virtual machines or any other resources. You also have access to this provisioning diagram that will help you in identifying, okay, what's the problem, why it failed, why I couldn't find a placement, etc. And you can look at the error messages where we expose potential issues, like not having resource capabilities defined that matches, for example, some of the constraints that you've defined within the Aria automation template. On the editing, we move to versioning. So one of the really cool features, as you start with the essentials and then you grow your template, you can always take a version snapshot, let's say. So this is a robust kind of built-in capability in versioning mechanism that allows us to track these changes as we make modifications for our template. So you can have multiple versions per cloud template resources. So you don't have to create multiple templates every time. So you can release that and we'll see that in the next getting more out of. We release certain versions so it becomes as available content that I can entitle to my business units or to my customers or to my users, so they can consume these items as I develop, the application that I'm working on. So version differentiation capability to see, for example, how is the current version differs from the old one if I'm new to the company or I'm just, tackling or been asked to, make this better, etc. So there are both code and visual based differentiation that you can use within the product. And then, like I mentioned, the release and to be able to release that to service broker, and so it becomes an available content for entitlement. Or let's say you've did something and then you find a bug in your code and you want to restore the old cloud template version. You can restore an older version as the current draft in your template, and then you can re-release the older version to service broker. Uh, the versioning, speaking of versioning, there is also Git integration that allows you to sync Aria automation templates. Just FYI here, this is uh, um, uh, a one-way integration from Git to the template, so you can store all your YAMLs into a Git repository. We support GitLab, like I mentioned, GitHub, and Bitbucket, and allows us to sync the templates in Aria Automation Assembler. So a few things to note here. When you're creating such an integration, you need to create a folder for each of your blueprint. They can't be all in the same folder. The file itself or the template itself needs to be called blueprint.yaml. Otherwise, the cloud template engine will not be able to sync. And then you have to, as you modify, let's say you use Visual Studio or Sublime or any text editor of your choice. When you're editing and modifying these on your laptop, and before you commit them, you have to change the version, the properties on the top of the blueprint. So when you do the commit, the integration will know that this is a new version, and Aria assembler will pull and sync the new version to the design menu. After the cloud template is added, all the relevant versions and commits from the grid are maintained. Anything you did before the initial sync obviously is not maintained. If you delete the cloud template from VRA, for example, or Aria Automation, it will not sync again. You would have to change the version and then re-establish the sync. And the initial pull is always immediate; it's right away. And then what we do is we do an interval every 15 minutes. We sync the Git repo, or if you did something now and you don't want to wait the 15 minutes for the next one, you can enforce it yourself. All right, so that was everything about the editing of a cloud template. Just to kind of set the cover a lot of different things that you would want to know before you actually dive into editing a cloud template. Next, we're going to move to user inputs in Aria automation templates. These are standard inputs. So you can see on the code on the right-hand side on line 8, we say inputs and colon, and then we define our inputs. Here you see size, it's a string, it's an enum menu. That means the requester is going to be presented with a drop-down menu that they can select from. And that value is going to be stored in that property called size. And then we can map that size to the appropriate property within the template. The inputs are auto-defined parameters that can be provided at request time, like I mentioned, and they are consumed through the template. There are different types of inputs that you can create. You can see this is a string, this is an integer, number, there are secrets, there's booleans, and there's tons of different types depending on, again, the input types that you're creating. Constraint here also can be applied to inputs. So that means if I'm creating let's say a secret or a password input, maybe I want to do a regex pattern to make sure that, small letters and capital letters, and it doesn't exceed this, this much. So you can actually control and have constraint on the imports provided by the user if they, let's say, they have to type something. Inputs are referenced by a $ curly bracket. So, and we'll see that in the next slide. So when I map, for example, the sizing property to a property for the image flavor, I can say, okay, I want to $ color bracket, and you'll see the autocomplete feature comes in, and you'll see, for example, you're looking at inputs, resources, self. You select input, you put a dot, and then you can pass the property name, which here in our case would be size, region, count, or database disk size based on the code on the right. If you're uncomfortable editing the code directly, you can switch to the input tab and enter the setting there if you want to. Again, I have a link here to learn more about everything you can do with the user input in the Aria automation template requests. And this is the screenshot here where if someone is not comfortable editing the code directly, they can go to the input tab on top of the code and basically look at any of the inputs or create new ones, and then editing and providing a title, a description, and the type of the input, and whether you want it to be encrypted or not. Especially if you're trying to create an input for like a password or maybe an SSH key, etc. Inputs also can be orchestrator actions. So we can actually use Aria automation orchestrator actions as inputs, and we call those dynamic inputs. So if you've kind of developed created an input that goes and pulls the content of the input, or maybe makes a database call and gets the content of a table and provide that as a drop-down menu, you can actually use orchestrator actions. And then the orchestrator actions can be passed on to. So the way we do this is when we create an input, we select the external source, and we basically define and look up at the actions, and we select the actions, which pulls the action, of course, from the embedded Aria automation orchestrator instance within VRA. And then one thing to note here is that the orchestrator has a must-have and include primitive string, integer, number, and boolean. There are some orchestrator types that are not supported, but they would have to be a string, integer, number, or a boolean for you to be able to use orchestrator actions as dynamic inputs. Okay. Tags and placements. So we use tags, two types of tags, constraint tags, metadata tags, and resource tags, actually. So in Aria automation template, we add constraint tags to resources in the YAML, so we can match a capability tag. For example, on the VM construct or the machine constructs, I might specify certain tags so I can target certain cloud zones or regions in terms of where this VM is going to go. So the cloud administrator creates the resources, the cloud zones, the storage and network profiles, and assign these capability tags that you would have to use if you wanted to land on a specific resource, like a specific cloud zone, or that has a specific region or a specific cluster, or even a single host or a resource pool if you're deploying to vCenter. Depending on where these tags are used, these are called either capability tags or constraint tags. So for example, on things like cloud accounts, integrations, cloud zones, network, and storage profiles, you'll see capability tags. And also you'll see constraint tags on the other side on things like image profiles, projects, blueprints. So as examples, you would create tags for things like environments, like let's say AWS, Azure, vSphere, GCP, maybe different vSphere component resources. So I may create a cloud zone that has a cluster, or test cluster versus production cluster versus dev cluster, etc. It could be a region or a location. It could be storage tier. So I have a storage profile that targets tier 1 storage versus flash versus tier 2, 3, gold, bronze, silver, etc. Or networking, if I'm deploying the VM to a DMZ, for example, or a public network or a private network, etc. So there's really no rules in terms of how and where to create tags. These are all driven by business needs and requirements. So again, in the slides, there is really great documentation. And one pro tip, I would say, you have to have a tag strategy when you go into this. And so this predefined tag strategy will save you tons of time instead of having to figure this out at the time of the usage. So uh, do a whiteboard, list all your destinations and tag them, and then use the corresponding tag and document that so users within the organization are aware of these tags and what to use. When it comes to the format, the string format, when it comes to tag, creating tags by using, you can use a tag label under a constraint. For example, in the code here on line 88, where we see constraint, automatically we'll see a list of tags. So I can do multiple tags. I can do hard required tags by calling hard at the end, which means that the tag is required, and if it's not found, fail. Soft tags, I can define the tags as constraint tags as soft, which is preferred, but don't fail if you don't find it. Or I can do negative, so not type of logic. So for example, not a tier called gold. So never put that VM on, let's say a gold tier storage, etc. There are two main areas where constraint tags are implemented. You can do them on project level, images, and image level, or blueprints. And one thing here to mention is that we merge all the tags to form a set of deployment requirements. So if your project has tags, if your image has tags, and the blueprint has tags, the constraints in all these areas are merged together to form that requirement. And the format is super. So you have a key. It's a key pair value. You can put an exclamation mark if you're going to say not this key, and then colon the value of the key, and then colon and whether it's hard or soft. If you do not define hard or soft, I believe the default is always hard. So it's always required. It becomes a required tag when you actually define it in the blueprint or on a project. Property groups is a way for us to ability to create and group together a predefined group of properties. So, for example, if there is properties that you want to use over time and reuse multiple times, so again, reduce sprawl, gives you quicker time to just call these properties. You have the ability to create, update, read, and delete properties groups with predefined data. So I can, for example, create all the property that I need in one property groups and basically consume these property and instead of having to define them every time I create a template. So allows the user to save time by reusing these groups of property and tracking resource usage in terms of where they're used and what blueprint they're used. And makes the overall cloud or template development a lot more efficient. And I have links here to a lot of different documentation around property groups and property enhancements, etc. In the screenshot, you can see here in this image, the way we do this is that we do a ref property, and then we mention the property group's name. and then we take the and call the property within the property group. So the binding to the property defined inside the property group, and then here the image property now is actually pointing to property group 123, and then therefore the value, and here the value I can say from the input, go and get the machine property dot image from the property group. So the value of that path is going to be assigned to the image property within the blueprint. It makes things a lot easier as your template grows over time. The properties themselves also can be used for secure properties or secrets. So a secret Aria automation assembler, it's a property that is reusable. It's an encrypted value that we automatically decrypt and pass it to the property, but it allows us to encrypt value that project users may add to their cloud templates. Examples are secure access keys, for example, credentials are really the typical examples of secret properties. But once it's created and saved, there is no way for you to uncrypt or read it in the UI. You can always overwrite it. So we read it and we decrypt it behind the scenes, and so to secure these credentials or access keys. Secrets can also be used in extensibility, and we will have a dedicated session on extensibility, whether with Orchestrator or ABX. But if you're leveraging ABX, action-based extensibility, which is serviceless scripting that can be with Python, Node.js, or PowerShell, and you want to pass some credentials and secrets, you can actually save those secrets and call them from the ABX action or into the script when it's executed. Note that the starting to type the secret, so you basically again do $ open curly bracket that opens, and you'll see a secret, and then followed by a period, and then it will list all the secrets saved within the secrets menu. So here in the you can see there's an SSH key property, $ secret dot, and then we're calling our public key that we saved in the secrets menu. Really a great way for project users that want to add secure properties and then bind them to the cloud template or to the extensibility ABX action. Custom properties. So so every elements we mentioned have a schema of properties. So I have a schema that defines what properties that you can define, and those are out of the box properties. But you can create your own custom property. For example, my custom property, my BU name, or my cost center, etc. So you can use a project custom property for things like reporting, or to trigger maybe an extensibility action that if this property exists on a deployment, go ahead and assign an IAM role to the VM. So for example, let's say for CloudWatch. So if you're installing the CloudWatch agent on an EC2 instance, you know that you can do that without assigning the IAM role with the right privileges so CloudWatch can operate. So if you have a property that's called here CloudWatch or IAM role true, like a Boolean, you can configure your extensibility to say, if you find that in the template as your, that would be my trigger, or for the subscription that calls out the extensibility to create an IAM role. So really great for extensibility, to trigger extensibility action and workflows. Adding the custom property to a deployment allows you to use the value in the user interface, and then we retrieve it using the API. So you can generate, for example, let's say reports. You might also have a particular property value that you want to change for a project, and then overwrite it, if you will, with extensibility. So you can encrypt the property values so that neither you nor your users can see the value. It's included in the deployment as well. So anything overall, anything in the properties bag that we like to say can be passed to extensibility. Like I mentioned, can be consumed by ABX action, can be consumed by orchestrator workflows can be used by any other purpose depending on what is it used for. All right, so resource flags, Aria Automation Assembler settings. So there are tons of resource flags that can be used to adjust how a resource is handled at request time. It's very important to understand that this is only at request time. So example, if we've included, for example, the flag prevent delete true, so it protects the created resource from being accidentally deleted during the update or iterative updates. So for example, you remember we said that I've matured my cloud templates and now I want to create a load balancer and then I would redeploy it on an existing deployment. That's an update. And so the prevent delete true helps us from any accidental deletion during the update operation. So set this flag to true, and then if the user deletes the deployment, however, the resource is deleted because the deployment is deleted. So so it doesn't protect against someone who comes in and deletes the deployment, but it would protect for somebody who's doing an iterative update. And then you have that, for example, and there's other flags like allocation per instance or create before delete or create timeout or delete timeout or depends on, etc. So there's a lot of different flags that you can look into, and there's a full list of supported resource flag, and I have a documentation link here. The resource flag settings aren't part of the resource object properties. So for example, if we drag and drop, like say a web server, you'll find out that the resource flag is always outside the properties property. So every element has a properties section, and then the flags are outside of that properties section, basically, for a given resource. Okay, so this is my really favorite in terms of settings that I can, which is cloud expression. So cloud template expression. So it gives us increased flexibility. I can add expression to the template code in Aria Automation Assembler. So these aren't the same as regular expression. So an expression uses always a $sign, and then the expression constructs, and then the expressions allows the template to evaluate that expression, whether it's a string, mathematical, conditional operations directly within the YAML. So we support literals. So for example, if you're passing a string, integers, or maybe doing something like this string plus this string, you leverage using environment variables. So I can maybe I want to bring in the org ID or the project name or the user who requested. So I can use those type of expressions. I can do resource variables as well. I can list all the different expression that I can pull. One of those things is, for example, in a two-tier application, you never know what the database IP address is going to be, right? So I would do an expression resource variables to the front end to say, hey, any IP address that gets assigned for this machine, go and actually use it as a value on this machine. So I can use the expression to pass values if I want to. Also, we support a lot of operators, there are equality operators like in YAML, double equal sign or not equal, like explanation and equal sign. Relational operators, bigger than, less than equal, and logical operators like and or. And here are some examples. For example, this is an input for count. If the input count less than 5 and the input dot size equals small, then do assign this value to this property, or make the count for the load balancer, let's say 1, meaning deploying a load balancer, etc. There's also arithmetic operators, plus arithmetic operators, so like plus, minus, divided by, and multiply. Constructions of maps, construction of arrays if you're building an array, cluster counts and functions. So I want an absolute number. I want a lower case or an upper case. So there's a lot of functions that you can use, and you can check the full list of expression and functions that you can actually use within your template to again help you get to that desired state. The custom resources can also be backed by Aria Automation Orchestrator or action-based extensibility. We mentioned that we have cloud-agnostic resource types, vendor-specific resource type, and if we don't have it, you can create a custom resource for it. So you might have that use case where you want to create cloud template based on an expanded list or resource type, or you can create a custom resource type. You can add them to the design canvas, and you can drag them and drop, and then create your cloud template that supports your design and deployment needs that you're looking for. You can use, obviously, extensibility. You have to use extensibility. So we go to design, and we go to the custom resources, and we create a custom resource. So when you create a new custom resource, you have to activate it first, and then define the lifecycle actions. Okay, I want to add a CD-ROM. I want to delete all the files. I want to do this. And then you can map those create, update, delete actions to specific workflows on the orchestrator or specific ABX action. And then when you drag and drop the element into the design canvas, you can populate the inputs and then provision the template that way. And you also can use it to create day two actions for the custom resource. So if I am adding a CD-ROM, I might add a day two actions that unmounts the CD-ROM or remove the CD-ROM, for example, etc. You can create extensibility actions, custom resources, simply by clicking on the design menu and go to the custom resources and create your resource. And then you'll see them listed in the element library, and you can drag and drop them just like any other resource within your canvas, and then populate the resource, basically, depending on how you configured it. Terraform. So we support open source Terraform. We can leverage the existing cloud accounts credentials for Terraform, and this is super important for a lot of our customers. What that means is when I'm creating a Terraform configuration file, I don't have to define or declare my credentials. VAria will automatically use the cloud account credentials. So if I'm deploying something to AWS, it's going to use the cloud accounts credentials for Terraform open source when it executes the Terraform configuration files. So there are two use cases here. We can use Terraform and drag them and drop them from Git repos and execute them directly from assembler, or publish the blueprint and execute them and extend them to our service broker users for whoever wants to, maybe create a DNS record or etc. And Terraform gives us a lot of to work with a lot of providers, so you can combine the Terraform element with providers together. So in some case, for example, you might create a VM, and maybe I want to create a DNS. And for the DNS creation, I may use a Terraform provider that basically takes the VM name or IP address, or all the required, like the record name, and combine the Cloud Template resource outputs. So, for example, whatever output I can get from deploying this VM, for example, let's say in AWS, I can pass those outputs to my Terraform configuration file as inputs, and then basically we can have a combination of the elements and using Terraform as yet another option to do things post provisioning. So depending on your comfort level, you can take Terraform template as is, something that you invested in today, and put them in VRA and use all the VRA governance from approval, release, and we'll talk about those things in another getting more out of session, which is the next one, I believe, when we talk about approval policies and leases and things like that. And that's the first. So I can, if I have a Terraform that I've configured or invested time and effort into provision, let's say an EC2 instance or an application on AWS, I can drag and drop that into a Git repo, and then add the Terraform template as a first-class citizen in VRA, and then use VRA and apply all the governance that VRA provides today, and be able to actually extend those Terraform templates as item catalogs to user, which is something that you won't be able to do. Usually, Terraform is used by the IT groups and not extended to the requesting team. And this is a great way to be able to do that with governance and control. And then the next use case, like I mentioned, is a combination of where VRA deploys the VM, use the output from the VM, and pass it into a Terraform configuration file, for example, that would create a DNS, and that DNS provider needs the record name, the record address, and you can get all these using, again, the expressions that we talked about. So here we have the record name that we're getting from the input, and the record address that we're getting from the VM. So any IP address that's going to be assigned, that's going to be passed to the Terraform element. It's a great way to actually use the power of the two. Custom specs, you're all aware of the vSphere customization spec that can both for vSphere customization specs and cloud agnostic. So you can actually use the custom specs in both cloud agnostics elements and vSphere specific elements. And custom specs is important to regenerate the signature ID or the SID, or maybe have some commands or post provisioning where you want to trigger using the customization spec. So even joining domains or IPing or all the custom specs, all the things or all the things that custom specs in vCenter delivers today, those can be used in your cloud template for within the vSphere specific element or the cloud agnostic element. When deploying to vSphere-based Cloud Zone and Cloud Assembly, customization specification here can apply, like I mentioned, guest operating system settings, and help with customization and or triggering certain things that you want to trigger after the VM is provisioned. The obviously, when you define the custom spec that you want here, you have to make sure that the customization spec you're calling out in your code actually exists in vCenter, in vSphere at the target. Otherwise, the deployment is going to fail. All right. So next, another way of doing things post provisioning is using Cloud Config, which is our interpretation of Cloud Init. So this is a directive that can be used. It's a bootstrap open source that can be used on a compute resource that provides a mechanism for first-time machine identity assignments, for example, or running commands, even software installations and customization as well. So a lot of the MPC hyperscalers today, like AWS or Azure, all the images supports Cloud Init, and they're built with Cloud Init, and so you can pass user data to define packages that you want. You want to create users. You want to create certain commands you want to run. So you can use Cloud Init. So we use Cloud Init on the Linux side, and on the Windows side, there's another open source project called Cloud-Based Init. It's the same approach, but Cloud-Based Init is an agent that you would have to prep on the template. But it's a different open source, but it's for Windows specifically. But it's the same thing. Mechanism for first-time machine bootstrapping, identity assignment, application installation, customization, etc. And also the really nice thing about here, if you notice in the code, that the Cloud Init stuff can also include blueprint expressions that contain input values and resource parameters. For example, I'm creating a user here. I might have the user as an input where the user actually going to provide the username, and then I'm passing that to the Cloud Init code for what user I want to create based on the user. So I can really make the template dynamic. And this is a second approach beside the vSphere customization on vSphere that you can use easily with if you're provisioning things on MPC, native public cloud. The third and the final approach here that we'll be talking about is the Aria automation application initialization and using the config element on the other hand to do things post provisioning. And this is an integration between Aria automation and Aria automation config, formerly known as SaltStack config. Out of the box software configuration management. So if you are an organization who owns VRA but still have not invested in a configuration management tool like Ansible or let's say Puppet, guess what? You're getting SaltStack or you're getting Aria Automation Config along with your Aria Automation purchase. Therefore, you already have a software configuration management. There is a broad set of application aware content in the market, a great ecosystem. And also, there's a lot of modules within the Aria Automation Config that would accelerate onboarding for things like VMware Cloud Foundation or VMware Cloud on AWS VMC. Obviously, something like that would eliminate dependency on third-party integrations for needing a configuration management solution. And there's a great innovation driven by a vibrant open source community for SaltStack. To give you an example, this is a SaltStack element dragged and dropped and hooked into the OpenCard VM, and the light bulb as an inline help to show us any optional additional properties we can insert in this code. And my code is highlighted in blue if you can see it. I'm not sure if it's really obvious in the stream, but here automatically we're pointing to what master we want this VM to. When we deploy the minion on it, it will automatically deploy the minion, and then it's going to report to this master. And then we're calling all the state files that we want to execute on the VM once it's provisioned. There are two types of examples here. One that I am basing on a conditional input. So if the input that the user selected is Linux, then it's always going to put and call out for this state file. Think of state file like a job or a playbook that would execute, and basically it's going to set the message of the day on the Linux machine. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything. And then the next one is actually an input of a state file, so the user can select between, Apache, maybe an e-commerce application, MySQL, depending on the state files that you've already configured and made available on the Aria Automation config. So also, and this is part of the SaltStack, I'm able to set my grains or my configuration or property on the VM, so I can push something like this is the application X, or this has the server role, a web server or a database server or a general server. Again, these things can be populated using explicit values or conditional values using the blueprint or the template expressions, or an input value from a drop-down list. So really able to manipulate what value you want to set depending on the use case that you're after. So Aria automation template. If you're looking for more examples, and I know we have like 10 minutes, I want to leave some times for Q&A. If has not been answered by Michael, thank you, Michael, for tackling the Q&A. So the Aria automation template code in Aria automation assembler can be almost limitless. Really, it's an open-ended in terms of the things that you can do with it. Therefore, I really wanted to make sure that this session touches on all the little important things before we actually go into a template and start, building our applications. And I will show you a live template for one of the applications that we do or we use for demonstrations. Link to the VMware docs, and also link to the cloud template use cases and content, examples, blueprints, etc. And join us for the next session. So just FYI, the next session will be May 11th. And I think I'm doing that as well. And this is where we start building our self-service portal and work with policies, things like approval policies and leasing and things like that. As well as we'll dive even deeper into one of the content. So we'll continue building a self-service cloud portal and services and curating services that can provide quick access to deploying infrastructure and managing application in your organization. Before we where to get more content and get more resources, we have Tech Zone. We have the HOL Lab 2201. Just simply go to HOL Labs at VMware.com. .vmware.com, HOL Lab 220112, our cloud management, VMware Aria Automation YouTube channel, and of course our blogs.vmware.com/management for our blog site. I want to thank you, but before we close, I really want to spend a couple of minutes to show you a really quick example of a blueprint. Now that you've kind of understood some of the topics or things that we've talked about within the cloud template, it's time to show you, for example, a live template. And then in the next Getting More Out of, we will see how we can take that template and entitle it our users with while applying governance. So in the design here, I'm in the assembler in Aria Automation. This is the SaaS side, and I'm going to show you the MOAD multi-cloud template. MOAD is an application, an e-commerce company that basically requires a shopping cart, and you can see in this that I've dragged and dropped all the cloud agnostic. So this is our resource type library, and you can see all the different elements that you have access to drag and drop and configure. Some elements are for specific vendors like VMware, AWS, and also some elements are for the salt stack or configuration management, GCP, etc., and even Kubernetes at the top, etc. So in here, if I click on my front end, you see automatically it highlights my code, and this is all the code that I've configured on the front end that's going to leverage Cloud Init to install packages that it needs, everything from PHP to Apache as a web server. And then on the MySQL side, I'm configuring different set of packages like MySQL and the users that I want to create, files I want to create, etc., and then all the commands. And even here, I'm even installing Aria operations for logs agent, the Cloud Watch agent if it's AWS, etc. So in terms of the inputs or the code, these are the top three elements that we said. So if I'm not comfortable with the code, I can always go to the property section, show all the property, and work with my element or construct and configure all the UI that I need, and then maybe switch the code and look at the generated code and think of this as a really good learning experience, if you will, to get comfortable with this is not really hard. This is not a programming language. It's really YAML with the typical standards and all the properties. And then the inputs, very similar. You can see on the top, if I scroll all the way up, if I actually can, and you'll see the inputs starts here. And if I go to the input section, you'll see all my inputs. And if I go to any of those, like environment, you'll see all my all the values of all my environments that I've defined here. And if I switch to the code, it will automatically put the code for me if, again, I'm not comfortable using the code. And this is just an example of using the same application and being able to deploy it on VCF, AWS, and VMware and MPC. And if we do a test here to emulate and simulate we can see all the drop downs and all the selections that we're providing to the user as they request their template. In terms of versioning history, you can see that we've already done multiple 15 different versions on this. So I can very quickly see which ones are released as content that I can entitle to my user. And again, remember to be there on May 11th for continuing the journey of building the portal. And if I at any point I want to see the diffs between the current version and the current before, I can see all the different things that got changed, which are marked in red here compared to it's marked. For example, maybe certain IP addresses targets have been changed, and therefore if I do a diff between the current draft and the 15, there shouldn't be any except some layout position, which is really not code changes. So you can see this is identical. And also I can do this visually if I want to see if there's any additions, deletions, and updates visually in my code. With that, thank everyone for attending. I'm not sure how we're doing on the Q&A, but I will go through some of them and answer. And let's see, is this session recorded? Yes. So all the session for getting more out of going to be actually they're already listed and available on the Twitter feed, but they will be available on the other platforms, and in the Getting More Out of blog, there will be links for all the recorded sessions. So yes. Let's see. I don't see all the, unfortunately, I don't see all the answers. Looks like it looks like Michael answered a lot of them. Other than that, I think we are good. Okay, thank you, Michael. All right, thank you very much, and I'll see you the next session on May 11th for getting more out of Aria automation. Thank you so much.